So now that we have understood the lineage in which Swamiji belongs to and from which the teachings come, could you give us a brief about what Swamiji's early days were in terms of his childhood, the initiation into sadhana, and then we'll get into a conversation about the states that he was in when he started teaching.
Yeah, you see, Swamiji's birth was predicted well before the time of his birth, and the first prediction actually came from, of all people, Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda visited Kashmir in 1897, 687, after he had become quite famous worldwide after his talk at the Congress of Religions, World Religions in Chicago in 1892. He went to Kashmir, and Swami Lakshman Joo's father was quite well known in Kashmir. He was one of the first Kashmiri pundits to learn English language, to wear English-style clothes, much to the discernment of the Kashmiri, culture. And he was the first to build houseboats that were available for accommodation for the Britishers, because nobody could own land except Kashmiris. So Vivekananda came and he stayed on one of his houseboats. And one day he requested, could he come to Swamiji's father's house? And he went there to have lunch with the family. Swamiji's father and mother, they had a total of about 11 children, I think, overall. But at that time, they just had a few sons and a couple of daughters. And at the end of that dinner, Vivekananda predicted, he said, I have a very strong feeling that a great saint, a great illuminary will be born into your household in the future. That's all he said. And then he asked Swamiji's father, are there any Mahatmas who I should meet? And Swamiji's father also, you see, Kashmiri saints always remained quite hidden. They didn't like any kind of publicity. But Swamiji's family priest was Swami Ram, who was Swamiji's grandmaster. So he had him taken to Swami Ram's ashram, which was just 100 meters away from their house. Swami Ram's ashram was a house that Swamiji's father owned, and he installed him there so he could practice his sadhana. And he did that for 20 years. He practically never left that place for 20 years. When Vivekananda entered the room, Swami Ram saw him, and he immediately told his disciples who were there, quickly, recite the Bhairava Stotra. Recite the Bhairava Stotra. And these are 10 verses that were penned down by Abhinavagupta. We sing them every week in our weekly puja. So the disciples recited the Bhairava Stotra in Sanskrit, in the very beautiful meter that they do in Kashmir. You have to understand the chandas they use in Kashmir since Abhinavagupta's time, and he was the master who changed the meters of all of these stotras, because he was also the great master of rasa theory. And he knew that hidden within these stotras was the essence of their message, if they were recited in the correct manner, with the right meter. So he had his disciples do it, and Vivekananda was so moved at the end of the 10th verse, he spontaneously recited one verse, impromptu. And after that, in the same kind of meter, and after that, Swami Ram also spontaneously recited one verse. So from that time, 1897, Kashmiri pundits have added these 2 verses to the traditional recitation of the Bhairava Stotra. And at the end of that, Swami Ram instructed Vivekananda, he said, you have to go to Kirbhavani and your problems will be solved. Nobody knew that he had any problems. He had just gone for a walk. Vivekananda's habit was in the mornings he would go for a walk without any disciples. He wanted to be free from the tamasha of having anybody around, be in that quiet. So the next day he went to Kirbhavani, and he found that the shrine there to Rangana Devi And interestingly, we're talking about Keeravani. Yesterday, Ashtami was her day. The Ashtami, which appears in Shravan, the month of Shravan. Yesterday, and in Swamiji's time, every day, every time on this Ashtami, Swamiji would go to Keeravani. There would be thousands of devotees from all over India would go to seek the blessings of the Devi of that shrine. So Vivekananda went there, and as he walked around, the shrine, of course, was in ruin after 500 years of Mughal invasion. They ruined or desecrated almost every major shrine. And as he walked around, he felt the vibration, and he was thinking to himself, I have enough influence that, if I was around at that time, I wouldn't have allowed this. But now that I'm here, I can certainly organize to rebuild this place. He was just having these thoughts. And suddenly, for the first time in Vivekananda's spiritual existence, he heard the voice of Devi. And the Devi said to him, who are you? Who are you to say you can do this or that? If I wanted to, and she said, if somebody comes and desecrates my temple, am I disturbed? Am I overwhelmed by that? And she said, if I wanted to build a 6-story temple of gold right here, right now, I could do that. So you go on with your work, do what you have to do, and kind of, in a way, leave the rest up to me. Don't overstep your mark like that. After that, when Vivekananda got back to his disciples, he said, it's all about Shakti. I have never really understood or embraced Shaktis. And that was his first experience of the Devi. And I think it's months after that where he went to Amarnath. And after his experience in the cave of Amarnath, this is all written down in the history, except this section where he met Swami Ram. You don't find that anywhere in the history of Vivekananda's life, but Kashmiri Pandits have it very well recorded. But after his experience of Amarnath, he was so overwhelmed that it was just a few months later that he left this world. At the age, correct me, about 34 years old. But he predicted Swamiji's birth. Swamiji's elder brother had passed away in their family, and Swamiji's mother and father went to Swami Ram. They also asked, please give us another son. We have one elder son, but our other son passed away, prematurely. Swami Ram reached in his pocket, gave Swamiji's mother 3 almonds. He said, here, take these almonds. Not only will you have a son, but he'll be an illustrious light in the lineage of Shaiva philosophy. So 10 months later, Swamiji was born. That was the introduction of Swamiji into this world. And, we have so many things on our website, little stories about that, and I've told many stories. But Swamiji said my birth was quite, miraculous. He said, of course, I'm a baby, I don't know anything. But he said Swami Ram, who for 20 years sat in, Padma Asana and lost the use of his legs because of that. So he was always carried everywhere in a chair. But at my birth, he requested that before I was even suckled by my mother on the breast, the baby should be brought to him. He was in the next room. They brought Swamiji wrapped up, and he got up and he danced around the room. He danced around the room and he sang these verses, and then he sat down and he had the baby in his lap, and Swamiji's father and his sisters and everything he said, well, what should we name him? And Swami Ram said, well, I'm Ram and he's Lakshman. And from that time he got the name, Lakshman. And of course the adage in Kashmir, he's Swami Lakshman Joo. Joo is a title. Raina is the family name. And he groomed Swamiji from a distance, and then he entrusted Swamiji's sadhana and spiritual life to his own chief disciple, Swami Madhavkar. And the rest of that is history. That when Swamiji was 8, Swami Ram left this world after giving him his janu, his Yagyapavit ceremony. And then after that, he Swamiji became a disciple a few years later of Swami Madhukak, and he just devoted his whole life to Swami Madhukak until 1942, till Swami Madhukak left this world. So that's the continuation of the lineage in that way. And Swamiji rarely talks about his own life and his own, but he said when he was translating the Bhagavad Gita, at that section where in the Bhagavad Gita it talks about yoga prashta, where the person who tries to achieve, Arjuna asks Krishna, what happens to that person who, tries very hard to achieve moksha, but at the end they don't quite make it? And Krishna says, well, they leave this world, they spend some time in the other world, but very shortly they come back again and they achieve that in their very next jnana. And one time Swamiji just casually said, that happened to me. He said, I had this experience. That's why I'm here now, he said. Like he was, like I didn't make it, so here I am back again. But this time I've been reassured by my masters. And he could say things so casually like that. And then sometimes somebody said to Swamiji, you're passionate about two things, the teaching of Kāśmīra Śaivism and vegetarianism. You're absolutely staunch believer in vegetarianism and very pure, no lasan, no piyaz like this in your ashram. And he said, yes. He said, it's my tendency because I was that way for my last 3 janmas. I was a pure vegetarian in my last 3. So I've carried those samskaras into this world. He said, but it's essential. For somebody who wants to really achieve something deep sadhana, he said, I predict and I prescribe that vegetarian diet is absolutely 100% essential. And he carried that through. He even gave a lecture in 1980 to Kashmiri Pandits in Kashmiri. And it was the first time he'd actually talked and given a lecture on the yamas and niyamas. And when he got to ahimsa, he was very, very specific, because Kashmiri Pandits had the habit over centuries to eat meat. In fact, they used to say that it's prescribed, and on Shivaratri you should eat meat and offer. He said it's a wrong thing. It came during the Mughal period. It was never there. You'd never hear Abhinavagupta talking about that. He talked about rituals, but he said no, it's a wrong notion. And he implored his Kashmiri devotees, please, don't eat meat if you're serious about your spiritual practice like that.
And did Swamiji speak about his sadhana days? What would it be like? What for somebody who was there with Swamiji at that time? What would they see? Or did he describe how those sadhana days went when he first started doing the practices and then on to the learning the scriptures and all that?
From his young age, he was already, as he said, he was steeped in practice. So from the age of 3, when he could sit up, he was continually disappearing. And his mother would say, go and find your brother. Where is he? We haven't seen him for some time. And they would find him sitting in a shoe almirah, half lotus, with his eyes closed, practically in samadhi. That was his habit. He was kept getting drawn into this state. And when Swami tells a story, a beautiful story. He said, when I was 5 years old, I used to sleep in the room on my brother's bed. My brother was a very sincere disciple of Swami Ram. He was a very close disciple, bhakta of Swami Ram, our grandmaster. And he said, I was a boy, 5 years old, but I used to sleep in his room. But I used to notice that I never saw him sleeping. In the night, he would be sitting up all night in meditation. He said, and one night, I didn't disturb him, but one night in the morning, early morning, I saw him opening his eyes. I said, what are you doing? From a child's perspective, what are you doing? He said, I'm meditating according to the instructions of our Guruji, Swami Ram. He said, teach me something. Tell me what to do. And he said, because I was young and my mind was pure, my brother said, okay, sit here now. Just look in the direction of the tip of your nose. Don't close your eyes. Don't have them fully open, but just like a Shambhavi mudra, just sit like this. And Swamiji said, I sat and I was just looking in that direction, not concentrating on the tip of my nose. That's a wrong notion. But I was looking in that direction. And suddenly, he said, I just went deep inside and I was gone. And after some time, I came back out, and my brother asked me, what happened? What did you experience? He said, I was 5 years old. I didn't. He said, I experienced buddy board. Buddy board in Kashmir is bigger than the biggest. I don't know what it was. But from that day, Swamiji started to do this practice, and he started to have these constant things where he would fall over, like fainting fits. He said, I would eat my food, and at the end of eating my food, it would be in my stomach. He said, then I would sit back and I would just look at it in that direction, and I would suddenly fall over. And it went on for 2 years or so. He said, and when I was 8 years old, or 7 or 8, they got very disturbed. They thought I was having hysteria. So they took me to Swami Ram. And they asked Swami Ram, please do some intervention, fix him. You know, he's having this experience of fainting all the time, especially after he eats food, he faints. And we can't bring him to. We have to shake him and sit him up and everything. So Swami Ram said, Swamiji said, Swami Ram, he had me sit in front of him, and he said, okay, do what you do. And immediately Swamiji looked at it, and he went into a very deep state. And they said, and Swami Ram also, just at that very moment, went into samadhi and sat. And for half an hour, with his family all sitting around, they were both gone. They were both in their own, deep state. And after half an hour, Swami Ram opened his eyes. He recited something in Swamiji's ear. Swamiji also opened his eyes. And then Swamiji looked at his parents. He said, this is no disease. He said, actually, this disease, I wish I had this disease on myself. And they said, but what do we do? He said, look, just apply a little bit of ghee on his top of his head, and this fainting will finish. He said, but don't stop him from having this bhava, this experience. And Swami Ram suggested, they said, but he falls over. They said, no, have his sisters sit around him, and when he starts to fall, prop him up. So that was the instruction of Swamiji at 7, 8 years old. And Swamiji said, my sisters would do that first, but then they would get tired. I would sometimes go into this state. They'd be sitting around, and then they would go away to play, and the next thing I would fall over, and I would come out laying down on the floor. And he said, so to punish my sisters, I'd get a stick and I would chase them and say, you were supposed to hold me up, like this. He said this so nice, beautifully and casually. He said, but then Swami Ram left this world. He said, and it wasn't until some years later, this experience kept going on in school. I would get into trouble because I would have this experience. I would just go into that state and they couldn't bring me out. But he said, when I was 15, I heard my father reciting some verses from Shiva Statravali. He said, it pierced my heart. And from that day, I just entered some real anugrah, some real grace entered me. And he considered that was his opening up. The seed was planted now for him to become fully immersed in Shaivism. So shortly after that, he was accepted by Swami Madhukaka as a disciple, and he was initiated 2 years later. Like Swami Madhukaka kept him waiting for 2 years, serving him wholeheartedly, as a disciple. And then he initiated him, and from then on, Swamiji's sadhana was, very clear. And so that was the story of his entry into this world. But Swamiji said, I already had all of these previous, benefits from past janmas, and this was just the fruition of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So it's very clear that from what happened early in his life and from his masters and his grandmaster, it's very clear that Swamiji was somebody who was already in many ways awakened right from his birth, and somebody who was he was just living out the rest of his purpose as a Shaivācārya. So in that context, could you just share some, if not anecdotes, probably what was Swamiji's method of transmitting teachings, and especially as a Shaivācārya, what was his emphasis in terms of the practice and the Shastra, and in general, how do you practice Kāśmīra Śaivism?
Okay, before I start that, again, as I've already said, a picture paints 1,000 words. I want to share my screen once again. I told you this would be kind of impromptu. This is a picture. It's a little bit of a rough picture. Tell me when you can see that.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is a picture taken on the day of Swamiji's jñāna, his Yajñapavit ceremony, which was performed by Swami Ram. This is Swamiji sitting here just to the right of his mother. You can see that his mother right in the middle of the picture. And, Swamiji at 8 years old. And surrounding him are his family. He had so many sisters and uncles. So this is Swamiji's mother. This is Swamiji's father in the background here. And these are his two brothers. His brother, his next eldest brother, who was called Bhagwan Das Raina, and his younger brother, Nilakanta. He had, and they all got their Yajñapavit ceremony done on the same day. And again, these are just the rest of the family members. But this gives you a flavor of what that was like at that time, of Swamiji. And from that age, he was already using Swamiji with his hands folded there or his arms folded. He was always a little bit defiant, especially with his mother, who was always trying to feed him meat. And, he just refused. From birth, he refused. He would push the thali away. His mother would try to entice him. No, meat grows on trees. It's a vegetable. But she would put things on his thali, and he would just pick up the thali. He would know automatically. And he'd go to the window and he'd throw the whole thali out the window. Even at the age of 8, 9, 10, and 11, until she finally gave up. She said, okay, because again, it became part of Kashmiri culture to eat meat. And she would tell him, you don't have any muscles, and all these things she would try to coax him, but nothing worked. So again, just from what I've just talked about, this paints that picture of
yes, yeah. It's a very interesting picture. I don't think I've seen that before, but yeah, thanks, Georgie, for that.
Yeah. And so Swamiji's method of teaching was different. I can only say from my perspective of listening to his teachings and listening to his talks, it was all-encompassing because everybody was different. And a master of his level, his caliber, would know exactly what the disciple needed. And you couldn't, what the word in English is, pull the wool over Swamiji's eyes. You could say anything to him and he would just say, yeah, oh, yes. But he knew exactly what you needed and what you were ready to receive. So for some, he would just say, read the Shastras. For others, he would say, just recite this mantra. For others, he would say, come back. Oh, yes, I'll initiate you. I'll give you a thing. And he would keep them waiting for 2 or 3 years to see if they were sincere. For everybody, it was different. And he said one time, I remember, he said, sometimes people come, they fall at my feet. I'm not concerned, he said, whether they touch my feet or not, because I see Shiva in everybody. But this is the phase where they've forgotten who they are, and they're trying to come back to that. So people fall at my feet, and they're desperately crying, Swamiji, I want to give my life up to you. He says, I look and I see, oh, yes, they're having a family problem at the moment. It's a big tamasha in their life, and now this is their thing. So he said, he said, I'm also a fraud. He said, I whisper some mantra in the air like this. He goes like that, he said, and I say, practice this mantra. So I know fully well that they'll do this for 1 month. Their problem will get solved, and then they'll stop. And this seed which is planted will not take fruit for another 10 lifetimes. But he said in 10 lifetimes, suddenly they'll wake up one day and in whatever janma they're in at that time, and they'll fully be immersed in the idea, oh, I have to go to the temple, or I have to meet a teacher, I have to do this, I have to read this book. And from there on, their real actual practice will happen. The path has already started. The path has already started. He said, because one step on the path of Shiva is enough. That's written by Utpaladeva, that's written by Bharata Narayana in his Stava Chintamani, these devotional texts. And he said, but when you sit before an enlightened master, he knows exactly what you need, and he knows exactly what you're asking for, and some people would come, but generally he would keep people waiting a long time. And I was also warned myself. They said, don't ask Swamiji to be initiated. Because when I first was there, Swamiji said, oh, look, yes, you're a disciple of Maharishi. Have you done the Siddhas program? I said, Swamiji, I've done all of that. He said, never miss your meditation. Never miss your meditation. Be very vigilant. And I was completely, except when I was so tired from working in the ashram, I'd had to sleep instead of meditate. So people warned me, don't ask for initiation, because one person had been there. He said I asked for 3 years, and finally, after 3 years, he said, okay. So one day I attended the lecture, and that lecture was from the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, which Swamiji translated, the 112 practices of entering the state of Bhairava. It's a text, particular to Kāśmīra Śaivism, from the Rudra-Yamala Tantra. It's an extract. And, they were talking about the practices, the dharanas on breath. And I had a vague idea, but I didn't know what they were explaining, And of course, people were asking questions about their own practice. And being around Swamiji there already for some time, a few months, I quickly learned that you don't just walk up to Swamiji and start talking. No matter what great problem that you have, worldly people could do that, and he would accept it. But if he accepted somebody as a somewhat disciple, the rule was you speak when you're spoken to. So Swamiji used to do this when I had something that was really burning. He would say, what are you thinking? He would look at me, what are you thinking? Then I knew it was open. I could say what it was. But up until then, I couldn't bring it out. Even if there was smoke coming out of my ears and I was imploding with curiosity on something. So after that lecture, I left the lecture room because he said, don't you have work to do? Have the painters or if they finish, the masons finish that work. So I would rush and do that, all the while thinking, well, maybe I should ask Swamiji to teach me one of these practices. And I remember it was a Friday, that's right. So after that, when I used to have lunch with Swamiji. I was so fortunate. I'd have lunch. And after lunch, I was sitting with him just quietly. And he said, what are you thinking? I said, Swamiji, I'm thinking that because today's lecture was about, these few dharanas of Vijnana Bhairava. And although I have a vague idea, I don't know it in practical sense. So I'm just wondering, and then the words came out, they kind of got stuck, should I get initiated? And he looked at me, he said, yeah, okay. He says, come tomorrow. He said, come tomorrow and I'll initiate you and there'll be no work to do. And I was just dumbfounded, My wait was like 12 hours or something. So I went the next morning, and because I'm a teacher of transcendental meditation, I went out to the village. I got a bunch of flowers, some fruit. I got a white cloth, a handkerchief, which was normal to bring a gift. And when I got there at 10 o'clock in the morning, Swamiji was sitting in the pavilion. There was nobody there. It was a Saturday. The ashram was closed. And when I came up to there, he was sitting on this little dais. He said, come sit here. And then he says, what's in the bag? And I said, I didn't know what initiation meant, Swamiji. So I bought these. And he looked in the bag. And I said, well, there's flowers, fruit, and a white cloth. This is what we used to do with Maharishi's thing. He said, oh, yes, Maharishi had that wonderful respect for his sampradaya, his lineage. So he said, thank you, and he put it on the thing there, and he said, now, and he just sat there and casually said, okay, do this practice, which is the salient practice. It's a practice that we do every week. You know, every week we teach this practice because Swamiji said this is a universal practice in Shaivism. And he said, meditate for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I sat there meditating with Swamiji. And at the end, he said, so you I said, yes, Swami, that's very clear how to practice. So then I asked the question, which is normal, how long should I practice this technique? And he looked at me, he said, until you reach moksha. It wasn't like 20 minutes. He said, this is not a practice just for sitting. This is a practice that you should do 24/7. He said, so my question, how long should I do it? Like 1 hour, 2 hours? He said, no, go on practicing this until you get liberation. And then he said, there's no work today. Go to your kutia, where I had a little small hut where I was staying. He said, and meditate wholeheartedly. So I remember that day I meditated for hours and hours until I was so tired I just fell asleep. And that was the start of my understanding about initiation. So to answer your question, a few months later, I asked Swamiji, again, he said, what are you thinking? You know, you're deep in thought. Please share with me what you're thinking. I said, well, Swamiji, when I came here, I was practicing TM. You told me to. And then you've initiated me 3 months ago, and I'm enjoying your practice. I do it, you know, as constantly as I can remember. And then I just said, but Swamiji, was it really necessary for me to get initiation and do all of these things? And he smiled and he said, actually, it's a good question. He said, it's enough just to be around me. It's enough just to be around me. And I knew exactly what he meant, because the real work was observing and being in his presence. And he said, don't miss your practice. He wasn't refuting that you have to practice to achieve something. In fact, he said, you have to practice meditation in order to get to the stage where you realize there's nothing to practice. You have to practice so that you can unravel all of the misconceptions until you sit one day and realize, oh, I am already, just like Shiva. And then your practice becomes automatic and you're 24/7 in that bhava of that. So that the lessons along the way were all very, very important. And it was basically a demolishing of my false concept of my ego, of who I was, my limited idea of myself. And this, I'm not talking about myself. I watched this happen to all the people around Swamiji. You know, people would come with so many questions, and eventually the questions would die away, and they would just sit silently. A good example of this is that after I'd been there some time, and one day on a Sunday, there were so many people, so many dignitaries, you know, politicians and that, and one of Swamiji's devotees who was the ambassador to Russia, you know, and all of these very high people. And Swamiji treated them all cordially, gave them all a cup of tea. And on that day, when devotees were leaving at the end of the day, we went to the front gate, which I'd done many times, and I would also step outside, and after he would lock the door, go to my kutia. On that particular day, I was the almost second or third last to leave, and as I stepped past Swamiji, he said, oh, George, I have some work for you to do on Monday. I'll be in silence, but wait here and then come to the veranda and I will tell you. So everybody else was outside, and these people, some people dressed in suits, and you know, there's 50 people standing in the laneway. Somebody closes the door, locks it, and he says, now follow me to the veranda and I'll tell you what I want you to do tomorrow. And as I'm walking behind Swamiji, and he used to walk with such a, you can't describe it, like he was floating actually. And I'm a safe distance, you know, 5 or 6 steps behind Swamiji. And this thought is going through my mind, wow, how important I am. All these people, dignitaries, they're outside, and I'm inside, you know, oh, like I'm the personal secretary. Swamiji's the CEO, and I'm his chief secretary. I was just having these thoughts, and suddenly Swamiji stopped And he turned around and he looked at me. He said, George. He said, don't attach yourself to my body. Don't attach yourself to Swami Lakshman Joo. He said, attach yourself to my Atma, to my consciousness. If you do that, he said, you will rise on the spiritual path. If you attach yourself to Swami Lakshman Joo in this body and all this other, you'll either remain stuck or you'll go down. And then he said, now come to the veranda, I'll tell you what to do. So he turned around, walked away. I bent down, picked up my head, which he'd just chopped off, my ego. I picked it up off the ground, put it back on, and I went and sat on the veranda. This is an example of how Swamiji would teach and would not let you run away with your illusion of grandeur, your illusion and your thinking that you're closer than anybody else to him, because he was close to everybody. And he had a magical way of making every single devotee, John said once, the magic of Swamiji, John Hughes said once, the magic of Swamiji was he made every devotee think that they were number one, that they were his closest devotee. And therefore they always looked down upon everybody else. I'm number one, and everybody else, they're coming along like sheep, but I'm number one. Swamiji had a magical way of doing that. But for me, the lessons were there always. And in the teachings, in the text, the question was asked, I think it's to Bhata Narayana. And Swamiji himself mentioned this a number of times. He said, what's the true sign of devotion? What's the true sign of a devotee who has devotion for Lord Śiva? And he says, Lord Śiva himself answered, said, no, I don't consider those who bow to me, with great reverence and everything, and bow to, me as Om Namah Shivaya, I'm bowing down to Shiva. That's okay. He said, but those devotees who bow to the bowing of the other devotees, when they see another devotee bowing to whatever it is, their Ishta Devata, their Guru, and that bowing moves them emotionally to bring tears to their eyes because they feel the rasa of somebody else's devotion. He said, that is real devotion. That is the essence of devotion. And those devotees will never belittle any other disciple. They'll never think that they're number one. They'll see everybody equal in the eyes of the Guru or in the eyes of Shiva or in the eyes of Krishna. What an incredible teaching Kāśmīra Śaivism is, to cut right to the essence of everything like that. And Swamiji was a master of that. Just bow to the bowing of the disciples.
I think there's a reference to this in the Shiva Stotravadi as well, right? Bowing to.
Yeah, bowing to the devotion of the disciple, because he said it's a real thing. The other thing, what we were talking a little bit before, touched on it, which is a very important thing in Shaivism. In Kashmir, many people get very surprised, especially if they're steeped in Shaiva Siddhanta or Southern Shaivism, how different the Kashmiris recite the various verses, with different meters. Like for instance, everybody knows the verse, Kapura Goram. So you can recite the typical way you hear, Kapura Goram Karunavataram Sansarasaram Bhujagendraharam Sadarvasantam Hridayāravinde Bhavam Bhavani Sahitam. This is a standard way. In Kashmir, there are different ways. They change the meter even to like a sama minute. Karpo Rigaram Karunavataram Sansarasaram Bhujagendraharam Sadarvasantam Hridayāravinde Bhavam Bhavani sahitam namami. This is the reason they do this, comes from Abhinavagupta understanding the essence of the Matrika and Malini Devis, the essence of the goddesses of the alphabet. And Abhinavagupta knew that when you elongate the vowels in any recitation like Samamita, it pushes you inside. If you want to shake up the environment, you do something in understood meter, like the Bahurabhagava Stotra, you know, Tripanchanayanam Devam Jata Mukutam. So the meters, once, another very good example, one very sincere devotee who had a beautiful voice and he used to recite in front of Swamiji. So one day after many years, he said, Swamiji, what is the correct meter to recite these verses? And Swamiji, without even a hesitation, he said, the correct meter to recite the verse is the one that brings tears to your eyes. He said, that's the correct meter. He didn't say it's Anushtup or it's Gayatri or it's, you know, he said, the correct meter is whichever meter brings tears to your eyes and takes you in internally. And in Tantra Loka, which is Abhinavagupta's agama, you know, on that, whenever he gets to a section where he has a devotional verse, instead of the standard, you know, Gayatri or Anustap meter, 8 bars, 8, he will elongate it and make it a very devotional text, you know, filled with rasa, so that you have to recite it in such a way that it pushes you internally. And this is because Abhinavagupta wrote the Dvana Lochana. He wrote the essence of rasa theory, and everybody took that after that. They finally understood, you know, the whole idea of what rasa was about. And a big part of that was this recitation. Abhinavagupta even said at the last verse of the Bhairava Stotra, he said, by mere recitation and meditation on this stotra, within a moment, that merciful Lord Bhairava destroys the sufferings springing from this wilderness of samsara. So what he meant there was, even if you don't understand what's being said, you're not a Sanskrit scholar, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, I would never sit down and try to translate a verse. But if you don't understand what it said and you sing with devotion, and there are tricks within that too, if you watch your breath while you're singing, you get the essence of the meaning of those verses. These are the gems, Swamiji said, of Kashmiri culture. This is what has set Kāśmīra Śaivism apart. And a clarification on that, it was never called Kāśmīra Śaivism. That name was given in 1911 by Chaudhry, who in the late 1800s was put in charge of finding all of the texts, compiling them, which the king, it was requested by the king, you know, Pratap Singh, and Ranbir Singh had collected all these manuscripts, were scattered everywhere during the 500 years of Mughal invasion. He put them in a library, they were gathering dust. Pratap Singh Swami Ram in late 1800s requested Pratap Singh to gather these manuscripts, have them translated from Sharda script into Devanagari. So that was the start of the Kashmir series texts and studies, set up by the Jammu and Kashmir government. And these texts started, and when the first one came out, which was the Shiva Sutras, quite naturally, Chaudhry wrote a book and he called it Kāśmīra Śaivism. So from 1911, what was known as Trika Darshana, Anuttara Trika, Pratyabhijna Darshan, all these different names that it had, according to the different systems, it's suddenly been known as Kāśmīra Śaivism, the Shaivism of Kashmir. And the reason that Swami Ram, remember, this is 9 years before Swamiji's birth, he requests this to be done. By the time Swamiji was 17, and he was directed by his master to study the Shastras, they'd already finished 45 volumes of the Kāśmīra series. So this was in preparation for Swamiji's coming into this world. And otherwise, Swamiji said, it would have taken me years to go and collect all these manuscripts and have scribes. He said, because I don't read Sharda script, but I learned Sanskrit for 2 years at the feet of Maheshwara Rajasthan, a very revered and highly respected Pandit who worked on all of these texts, these Sanskrit series. And I studied with him for 2 years, and then Tantra Loka was ready, Netra Tantra was ready. Utpaladeva's he learned Shiva Sutravali and Abhinavagupta's Bhagavad Gita from his own master, Swami Mattakak. But then Swami Mattakak sent him to Maheshwara Rajasthan to learn the intricacies of Trika Shaivism. So everything had a flow, and Swamiji said, this is all Lord Shiva's plan. He said, relax, be at ease, do your practice. Don't be anxious about things, because Lord Shiva has requested Durvasa Rishi to look after Shaivism for the duration of Kali Yuga. He said, we're only 5,000 years in. There's still 5,000 years. There's 3, how does it work? 3,400. So there's 3,370 years ready to go, still to go. And it will wax and wane. It'll wax and wane.
I mean, the intricacies of what you just mentioned right now from Swamiji's teachings, I think these are gems, right? Probably I'd like to wind up this conversation, and I have hundreds of questions. This could go on, as you said, until the cows come back. But what would you say is the future that Swamiji envisioned for Kāśmīra Śaivism and the study and the practice of it, and how do we connect with him? If you could just share that in brief.
Okay. That answer could take a book, but the reality is, for Kāśmīra Śaivism, when Swamiji was asked during his lectures on the Bhagavad Gita, when it was on video that John was recording in 1990, one of the disciples asked Swamiji, so what will happen when you leave this world? How will people get initiated? He immediately pointed to the camera. He said, through this. Now, what he meant by that was that in Kāśmīra Śaivism, knowledge itself, the knowledge that had been handed down through this lineage for more than 5,000 years, the knowledge itself is liberation. Abhinavagupta says that most other systems say that knowledge is the cause of liberation. Abhinavagupta says, no, knowledge itself is liberation. Because the knowledge that we get in the initial stage pushes us in a certain direction. And that knowledge continues to refine and refine and refine until one day that knowledge becomes all-encompassing. It becomes the Bauddha Gyan and your intellectual knowledge and your Purusha Gyan, your spiritual experience, merge to become this unbounded universal knowledge. So he said, through this knowledge, and then he added, he said, you have so many books to publish. And it was at that point that John, discussions with John later on, that we decided that rather than publish Swamiji's books as edited books, which the first 3 books were done, why not release them as the original audios? So that we started this in 2003, and I'm sure the inspiration came from Swamiji that let people hear my own voice. And from that, he would say, some people will get much more out of this than you. You can't, he said, Abhinavagupta said, you can never gauge the level of consciousness of the disciple. So never feel that as a teacher that you are above your audience. Always perceive in your audience that Shiva and Shakti are within that person listening, who can wake up to these words, which came originally from Shiva and Shakti. So in that sense, the teaching itself is real initiation. And I was asked this question a year ago in Nepal in an interview that I did with a very dear friend here. And he said also, what about initiation? The reality of Kāśmīra Śaivism is that if we're all Shiva and Shakti live in the hearts and minds of all living beings, then actually we were initiated at birth. As soon as we came out of the womb, and in the West it's very barbaric, the doctor holds you upside down, they cut the umbilical cord, and if you're not breathing yet, the doctor slaps you on the back and you take your first breath, to bring you to life. I mean, more ancient cultures are much more, they actually wait until the child takes their first breath, and after that, then they'll sever the umbilical cord. That first breath, Swamiji says, is your first initiation. Because you're being initiated by yourself, by Shiva and Shakti within yourself, who are now taking in breath. He said it may take 30 years before you wake up and you go or you read a book and it says you want to meditate. It says, oh, just watch your breath. But for that 30 years, you were breathing continuously. So your initiation started then. Your wake-up call happened whenever it was. For me, it happened when I was 18. For Swamiji, it was already there. He was already, from the moment he took his first breath, Swami Ram brought him into the room, Said before his mother gives him any milk, he has to come to me. He held him, he danced, He's Lakshman, I'm Ram, he's Lakshman. So, and from then Swamiji, with his awareness, he would go into samadhi. Some other person, it might be, they're 50, 60 years old. The determination of that is dependent upon the grace which is within you. It may have something to do with past, but Swamiji was never into discussing, am I here because of this past life or that past life? He said, no. What you've already experienced in this life is past. Leave it, move forward, do your practice. So, and from that, I remember when Swamiji said, okay, now you do this practice, just watch your breath. It was like somebody just rekindled, oh gosh, I've been watching my breath. I've been actually breathing all my life. I'd just forgotten. My focus was outside. He said, now focus on that and you'll see that what you feel is your second initiation, basically. And then as you do this and your breath becomes more and more refined, and Kundalini rises and you get to that point of Visarga, you will realize that you've always been being breathed by Shiva and Shakti. So that's the essence of that. And the other part of the question was, if you remember.
It's connected with what Swamiji was mentioning as what's the future of this tradition, how it goes on, etc.
John Hughes used to ask the most poignant questions because he was like, Swamiji used to call him my own son, And that's why he named him Chandrasekhar, And John said, so Swamiji, you can't leave this world. In 1990, Swamiji said, I'm leaving the world soon, so you have to do this work. He said, Swamiji, you can't leave this world. There's so many more texts that you have to do. You've got to do the Parachashika Vivarana and all this. Swamiji said, no, I'm tired now. I'm old, And Kashmiris will say, I have no stomach, my digestion is going, I'm ready to leave this world. And then John said, no, you have to do this because, there's somebody, and then, people will say, Swamiji didn't finish this, he did this. He was trying to coerce Swamiji to stay because Swamiji made a point. He said, I'll be here for a couple of more years, do the most of it. He said, no, people will say this and that, Swamiji Lakshman Joo didn't finish. And Swamiji said, what will Lord Śiva say? And John said, Lord Śiva will say Swamiji should finish. Then Swamiji burst into his laughter. He said, no, don't tease me. Because he felt like that. He said, it's okay. He said, the teaching will continue itself. The teaching will fulfill. And when the time is ready, Lord Śiva will send somebody else just to guide you. And that person will guide you, not look at me, but that person will guide you towards the teaching, the pure words of Lord Śiva. He said, because it's all there. I've already laid out what you need to know. It's all there in the teaching. And, the beautiful thing that I notice about Swamiji, he never set himself aside from his audience. He always made you feel comfortable, and he lifted you up to make you feel full in yourself. I can remember my early days, I would leave the ashram with such a feeling of fullness, like I was complete. I would come with a million questions, curiosity, because I'd read so much and I wanted to compare it. And by the time I'd spent the day pruning trees and digging in the garden, and we'd have a cup of tea in the afternoon, it was getting dark, he said, now go rush to your kutia and meditate. I would step outside the door with a feeling of completeness, a fulfillment, like a feeling like I nothing else to get that day. That's the back and forward flow, of that. But Swamiji would never separate himself. He would never have a huge backdrop of thing. He said, because when you're trying to teach a universal teaching and you separate yourself from your audience, you're already creating a duality. Me and them, you and them. Sometimes people would come, and Swamiji's brother, who you saw in that picture, his younger brother, who was 2 years younger, he was a little bit feeble. So Swamiji would be sitting in this deck chair, he'd like to relax in a deck chair. And his brother Bhagwan Das would come and sit in a chair was slightly higher than Swamiji. And on the Sunday, when people would come, they would see in Kāśmīra, or in India, whoever's sitting at the higher, he's the more revered. So people would come and do pranam to his brother. Right next to Swamiji, Swamiji would be sitting in the deck chair, just back watching. These people had no idea, they'd never met Swamiji before. And 5 or 6 people would come from Bombay or somewhere, they'd heard about Swamiji. They would do pranam, and then they would sit down. And then the very next disciple would come and do pranam in front of Swamiji. And they would look, they were confused. The Swamiji would look at them, no, it's okay, don't get up. He said, he's also Shiva. He is also Shiva. He said, it's not important. Shiva is in everybody. That's how unassuming he was, and just so many little examples of the way he behaved in the world. And it was, as I say, that was lessons that I learned every day, infinite number of lessons. And fortunately, I have a fairly good memory, so I remember many of those lessons. And I whenever it comes up in our Sangha, and there's a little bit of time at the end, I'll always tell a story illustrative of something from Swamiji. And he's still very active. Many people come to the ashram who never met him, and they say, I had a dream. Swamiji came in my dream, gave me some practice to do, and it turns out that it was the same practice that everybody's doing.
Beautiful. So, Georgie, I've asked you for a flower, and you have given me a garden. So, thank you so much for spending so much time with us. We've discussed a lot. This is absolutely not complete. There's a lot more to discuss, and probably if Lord Shiva permits and his will is there, we can go into a lot of detail about the essentials and the philosophy of Kāśmīra Śaivism. And that's something that I intend to do in the future as well.
I'll just finish with one thing that
yes.
In the 80s, the first book that was released was Secret Supreme by Swamiji. It was 19 chapters, which he felt were the essence of Shaivism, because John and Denise Hughes had come there from America. They met Swamiji through Mahesh Yogi in 1969. John wanted to do his PhD. Kāśmīra Śaivism was a totally new subject. His professor at the university in Canada at that time said, yes, if you can go and be with Swami Lakshman Joo, you'll be very lucky. He asked permission from Maharishi, and Maharishi said the same thing. If you can get any knowledge from Swami Lakshman Joo, it'll be great. In fact, whatever you publish, please send me those books. So John went there thinking, I'll do my PhD. So he asked Swamiji, and Swamiji said, yeah. And John, fortunately for us, John really loved electronics. He took one of those old reel-to-reel tape recorders, a very good one, a Uer, which was top of the range. So he recorded these lectures, and Swamiji just sat impromptu and gave him chapter by chapter the essence of what he felt John needed to know of Kāśmīra Śaivism. That book became Secret Supreme, the first book. Swamiji even named the title, call it Secret Supreme. It's very interesting because that book is basically a condensed version of Abhinavagupta's Tantraloka. It's tough going at first for people, but whenever Swamiji would give that book to somebody and he would sign it, over the years that I was there, he'd say, George, get a copy. This person wants to study Shaivism. He would hand the book, and as the person was about to grab the book, Swamiji would say, would read this over and over and over and over again. Read it for the rest of your life. If you don't read anything else, just read this. And he would say, and you will sink in the reality of Kāśmīra Śaivism, and you'll begin to understand your own nature. And that was his instruction. It isn't that you can just get it. When people come to me and say, oh, look, I've read all of Swamiji's books and now I have these questions, I usually say, well, go back and read them again. Go back and read them again, Because John and Denise and I, we've been reading this for so many years. We're doing the Shiva Sutras at the moment in our Saturday Sangha. Every week I learn something new. Swamiji said, you never stop learning. This subject is infinite and vast. Never feel that you know it all, because once you think you know it all, you'll stop learning. And that's so as you say, we could have a webinar, or we could have this interview every day for months on end. But the essence of it is if somebody really picks up the thread and sees that, oh wow, there sounds like there's something in this, they'll get a book and they'll read it. And going through it, as John Hughes politely puts it, when you start reading this, suddenly something dawns that this sounds like my own story. I'm reading the reality of my own story, the 36 tattvas, the alphabet, the malas and all of these things. It feels like this feels very familiar. That's the essence of Kāśmīra Śaiva, because it is our own story given to us by Lord Śiva through this wonderful lineage of masters. I just needed to add that because curiosity killed the cat, they say in the West. And when somebody has a lot of questions, often those questions are coming out of a kind of agitation. And if you set them to, just sit quietly and observe. I told you yesterday in our wonderful conversation we had, people come to Swamiji's ashram and sometimes they want to meet George. And when they say, oh, we want to meet George, we saw him on a thing. And even if it's me there, I say, well, look, he's busy right now. They say, oh, we have so many questions. I say, well, okay, go to the satsang hall and meditate for 20 minutes, half an hour. Sit in Swamiji's presence where he gave lectures in that hall. And afterwards, if I have some time, I'll sit with you. 90% of the time, the people come back and they just, from downstairs, I'm up on the bed, they say, Namaskar, thank you. And they leave contented as if their questions were answered. Because the reality is that the essence of what you need to know is already there. It's already inside you. And if you touch that, which people do in Swamiji's ashram or by listening to his teachings, so many people say, I watched Swamiji's Bhagavad Gita and I felt really connected to Kāśmīra Śaivism. That's the reality. So don't feel that you can just write out a huge list of. This is very valuable for everybody. The real value is in some practice, coupled with knowledge, and you'll see hand in hand. That will be the most liberating thing you've ever done in your spiritual path. So I pray that Lord Śiva, whoever your audience, from whatever system they're coming, whatever sampradaya or practice, that Lord Śiva should enlighten your spiritual path and your spiritual journey along the way.
Thank you, Georgie. Thank you. That's a beautiful prayer and a blessing for us. And as you mentioned, from what you said earlier about how people come to meet you and then you send them to the hall. So Swamiji dissolves the limitedness, and all of the questions that we have, all of the curiosities that are there are coming from this limitedness. So thank you for pointing that out. I think that's something that's a beautiful thing to contemplate while we come to a conclusion with regards to this particular interview. Thank you so much for all your time, Georgie, and yeah, looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you for allowing me to come onto this forum. And I know that you've already done a wonderful interview with John Denise with their background at Swamiji, because they were the original ones who met with Swamiji. And yeah, very thankful for that. And by Swamiji's grace, his message will continue to enliven people worldwide. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.